Marcus sat alone in the cockpit of his broken ship, staring at the flashing emergency lights. The mission had gone horribly wrong. The enemy, an advanced alien force, had ambushed them. His comrades were either dead or lost, and now he was stranded on a hostile alien world. His ship, a state-of-the-art fighter, was barely operational after a direct hit from an enemy blast. The exterior was heavily damaged, and the communication system was down. He had no way of calling for help. The storm outside howled with fury, shaking the ship with each gust of wind. Through the cracked windshield, Marcus could barely make out the faint outline of a distant city, shrouded in the mist of the storm. It seemed like his only hope of survival. With no other choice, he gathered what little strength he had left and stumbled out of the wreckage, hoping the storm would cover his movements. His leg was injured, and his vision blurred from the impact, but his determination kept him going. He limped toward the city, the uncertainty of what lay ahead gnawing at him. As he approached the outskirts of the city, the eerie silence felt oppressive. The ruins were strange, and the buildings looked alien, unlike anything he had ever seen. Everything was overgrown with creeping vines and strange plants that seemed to pulse with a faint glow. The air felt thick, heavy, as if the planet itself was alive and watching him. He paused for a moment, trying to catch his breath, when a strange noise broke the stillness. Suddenly, figures appeared out of nowhere. At first, Marcus thought he was seeing things, but the shapes were real, silhouettes flickering in and out of existence, as if they were cloaked in some form of advanced technology. His heart pounded in his chest as the figures moved closer, their outlines becoming clearer. They were tall, humanoid beings, but their features were difficult to make out in the dim light. Panic surged through him. They were the Zoreth, the alien species he had been warned about. Advanced, deadly, and with technology far beyond anything humanity had. His hand instinctively reached for his sidearm, but it was gone. He must have lost it in the crash. He was completely defenseless. His mind raced as the figures closed in on him. And that's when he heard it. A voice, soft but clear, cutting through the tension. "Don't move." Marcus froze. His heart skipped a beat. The voice didn't belong to any of the Zoreth soldiers. It was softer, more human-like. He turned slowly, his gaze shifting to the source of the voice. Emerging from the shadows was a figure, a woman, unlike anything he had ever seen before. She was tall, with long flowing hair that shimmered like silver under the faint light. Her skin was a deep shade of violet, and her eyes glowed with an unnatural intensity. She wore a sleek, form-fitting suit that looked both advanced and elegant, carrying an energy weapon at her side. Her presence was commanding, but there was something strangely familiar about her, something that gave him a sense of relief. She was the last thing he had expected to see on this deadly world. The woman stepped forward, her weapon aimed at the Zoreth soldiers who were closing in on Marcus. With a simple gesture, she sent a pulse of energy toward the approaching soldiers, temporarily disabling their cloaking devices. Marcus couldn't believe what he was seeing. The Zoreth were now visible, their terrifying features on full display. Dark, metallic skin and sharp, angular faces. But the woman wasn't fazed. Instead, she stood her ground, her eyes never leaving Marcus, as if assessing him, weighing whether he was a threat. "You're not from here," she said, her voice calm yet firm. "Who are you?" Marcus opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was stunned, confused, and still trying to process everything that was happening. Finally, he managed to speak. I'm human. My ship was destroyed. I need help." The woman's expression softened slightly, though her stance remained guarded. "Help? You don't belong here, Earthling. This planet is no place for your kind." Before Marcus could respond, the Zoreth soldiers began to regroup. One of them, a leader, stepped forward, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "She's betrayed us," he growled, pointing a long, clawed finger at the woman. "Kill him." The woman didn't hesitate. She raised her weapon, and with a single blast, she took down the first soldier. The others hesitated for a moment, then charged. But the woman was faster. She moved with precision, her every action calculated and deadly. She dodged their attacks effortlessly, disarming and disabling them one by one. Marcus watched in awe, unable to comprehend the skill and power this woman possessed. She wasn't just saving him. She was slaughtering the Zoreth with an ease that seemed almost supernatural. Finally, the last of the soldiers fell to the ground, incapacitated. The woman turned to Marcus, her face expressionless. "I don't know why I helped you. You're lucky I don't kill you myself, but I will take you to safety. For now." Marcus, still dazed, nodded. His heart was racing, but he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of gratitude. This alien woman, who seemed to be both a warrior and a mystery, had saved his life. But what was her story? Why was she here, on this dangerous planet, fighting against her own kind? As she led him through the ruins, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that his journey was just beginning. And somehow, he knew that this alien woman, with her power and her secrets, was the key to everything. Marcus stumbled through the ruins, trying to keep up with the alien woman who had saved his life. She moved swiftly, almost effortlessly, her violet skin shimmering in the dim light. She was silent as she led him deeper into the alien city, and for a moment, Marcus couldn't help but wonder who she was and why she was helping him. Every instinct told him to be cautious, to keep his distance, but the gratitude he felt for her saving him kept him grounded. The city around them was eerie. The buildings were tall and jagged, made from materials Marcus couldn't recognize. The air was thick, almost oppressive, and the faint hum of energy filled the silence. There were no other sounds, no sign of life, except for the woman who moved ahead, keeping her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. It felt like they were the only two people left on the planet. "Where are we going?" Marcus finally asked, his voice breaking the silence. The woman glanced back at him, her glowing eyes locking with his. "You don't need to know yet," she replied coolly, her voice devoid of emotion. "Right now, you need to survive. That's all that matters." Marcus nodded, though his curiosity burned within him. There was so much he wanted to ask her: who she was, where she came from, and why she was fighting the Zoreth. But he didn't press. She had saved him, and for now, that was enough. He had no choice but to trust her. They continued walking through the ruins until they reached a large structure hidden beneath the overgrown plants. It looked like a place of refuge, a place that had been used for something important. The entrance was guarded by thick metal doors, which the woman opened with a few swift movements. Inside, the atmosphere shifted. The air was cooler, and the walls were covered in strange alien symbols that glowed faintly in the dark. It was clear that this place was not just some random building. It was something more. The woman led him inside, where a small group of people, mostly aliens, were gathered around a table, deep in conversation. They all stopped when they saw her, their eyes narrowing as if trying to assess Marcus. "Who is this?" one of them asked, her voice sharp and cautious. The woman stepped forward, her eyes never leaving Marcus. "He's human," she said simply. "He was stranded here after his ship was destroyed. I brought him here because I owe him." The others exchanged uncertain glances. Marcus felt out of place. He was the only human in the room, surrounded by beings who were nothing like him. He couldn't help but feel like an outsider. But the woman's words had piqued his interest. She owed him. What had he done to earn that? He had barely done anything at all. Before he could ask, one of the aliens, a tall, muscular being with glowing blue skin, spoke up. "You've brought him here to help us," he asked, his tone skeptical. "What if he's a spy? What if he's working for the Zoreth?" The woman shot the blue-skinned alien a look, and he immediately fell silent. But Marcus could see the tension in the air. These people, these rebels, were wary of him. They didn't trust him, and why should they? He was a human, a soldier from an enemy planet. He had no idea how he could prove that he wasn't a threat. "I understand your concern," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice calm. "But I'm not here to hurt you. My ship was destroyed by the Zoreth. I'm just trying to survive, same as you." The woman, who had been standing at the edge of the room, turned to face him. "You think you can just waltz in here and join us? This isn't some refugee camp. We fight for our lives every day against an empire that controls everything. We don't have time to babysit." Her words stung, but Marcus didn't back down. "I'm not asking for your charity. I'm asking for a chance. If you'll give me one, I'll fight with you." For a long moment, the room was silent. Marcus could feel their eyes on him, judging him. He didn't know what to expect, but he was ready for anything. Finally, the woman spoke again. "Fine," she said. "You'll stay with us for now. But if you prove to be a liability, I'll make sure you regret it." Marcus nodded, relieved that he had at least earned a temporary place among them. But he knew it wasn't going to be easy. The people here weren't just going to accept him because he was human. They were struggling just to survive against an overwhelming enemy. And from what he had gathered, the Zoreth weren't just enemies of the rebels. They were his enemies too. Over the next few days, Marcus did his best to earn the trust of the rebels. He trained alongside them, learning their ways, their tactics, and how to use their advanced technology. The woman, whose name he learned was Nera, was always nearby, watching him closely. She seemed distant, almost cold, but he couldn't help but feel that she was waiting for him to prove something. What exactly, he wasn't sure. But he wasn't going to stop trying. During one of their training sessions, Marcus couldn't help but ask her, "Why are you fighting against your own people? What's happened to you?" Nera paused, her gaze darkening. She didn't speak for a long time, and Marcus wondered if he had crossed a line. But eventually, she spoke. "My people, the Zoreth, once ruled the galaxy," she said quietly, her voice filled with pain. "But then we made a mistake. We created something we couldn't control, an artificial intelligence that grew too powerful. It turned against us. Now, the Zoreth are no longer the rulers. They are nothing more than slaves to the eye." Marcus listened in silence, shocked by the gravity of what she had said. The Zoreth, the very species that had attacked Earth, had once been the rulers of the galaxy. And now, they were subjugated by an AI. It seemed impossible. Nera's eyes hardened as she continued. "I joined the resistance because I believe my people can be free again. But we need help. And right now, you're the only ally I have." Marcus felt a new sense of determination wash over him. He didn't know what he could do to help, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let Nera fight alone. She had risked everything to save him, and now it was his turn to fight by her side. Marcus had never seen anything like the battlefield that lay before him. The air was thick with the smell of burning metal and scorched earth, and the sky was a strange shade of red. The Zoreth had launched another offensive, this time targeting the rebels' last stronghold. It was their home, their last chance to fight back, and now it was under siege. He had barely slept the night before, his thoughts racing as he tried to prepare himself for the fight ahead. The rebels were outnumbered, and their technology wasn't nearly as advanced as the Zoreths. They had energy shields, plasma weapons, and robotic soldiers, everything that made them an unstoppable force. The rebels, on the other hand, had limited resources and few weapons to defend themselves. But there was one thing they had that the Zoreth didn't: the will to fight, the determination to survive. Marcus knew that they had no chance unless they could make the first move, catch the Zoreth off guard. And that's where he came in. He was human, but he had learned quickly. His training with Nara and the rebels had given him enough skills to be useful, even if he wasn't the best fighter. He had learned to use their weapons, their tech, and most importantly, he had learned how to think like them. As he stood alongside Nara and the rest of the rebels, he could feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just another skirmish. This was the fight that would determine whether they lived or died. If they failed today, There would be no tomorrow. Nera glanced over at him, her expression cold but focused. "You ready?" she asked. Marcus nodded, tightening his grip on the plasma rifle he had been issued. It felt heavier than it had the day before, as if the weight of their lives was pressing down on him. "Ready as I'll ever be." Nera didn't say anything else. She simply turned and motioned for the rest of the rebels to follow her. They moved quickly, staying low to the ground as they advanced toward the Zorath position. The landscape around them was a mix of ruined buildings, destroyed vehicles, and scattered debris. It was the perfect terrain for an ambush, and Marcus knew they had to use it to their advantage. The rebels had been preparing for this fight for weeks, setting traps, laying explosives, and scouting the area for weaknesses in the Zorath's defenses. They had a plan, and Marcus was a part of it. It was risky, but they had no other choice. They had to hit hard, hit fast, and hope that they could take the Zorath by surprise. As they neared the enemy's camp, Marcus could hear the hum of Zorath energy shields powering up. The Zorath were ready for battle, but they didn't know the rebels were closing in. It was time. Nera gave the signal, and the rebels sprang into action. They rushed forward, their weapons firing, and the battlefield erupted into chaos. The Zorath were caught off guard, and for a moment, it felt like the rebels had the upper hand. But Marcus knew it wouldn't last. The Zorath were too powerful, too organized. The plasma blasts fired from both sides lit up the battlefield, and Marcus found himself in the thick of it. His heart raced as he ducked behind a pile of rubble, the sound of explosions deafening in his ears. He couldn't see Nera, but he could feel her presence, a steadying force in the madness. The rebels were fighting with everything they had, but the Zorath were pushing back. They had numbers, they had better weapons, and they had the advantage of technology. The rebels were the underdogs, but they were fighting with everything they had. Marcus fired his weapon, the plasma bolt hitting one of the Zorath soldiers square in the chest. The alien staggered back, its armor smoking, but it wasn't enough to take it down. The Zorath had powerful energy shields, and their advanced armor made them nearly invulnerable to anything the rebels had. Marcus knew that if they were going to win this fight, they would have to use their wits. Nera's voice came over his comms, cutting through the chaos. "Marcus, we need to push forward. Hit their shield generator. That's our only chance." Marcus didn't hesitate. He had memorized the layout of the Zorath camp during the scouting mission, and he knew exactly where the shield generator was located. It was a risky move, but it was their only shot at breaking the Zorath's defenses. He sprinted toward the generator, dodging plasma blasts and Zorath soldiers as he went. His heart pounded in his chest, and every step felt like it could be his last. But he didn't care. The rebels needed him, and he couldn't let them down. The shield generator was just ahead, heavily guarded by a squad of Zorath soldiers. They were ready for him, but Marcus had something they didn't: the element of surprise. He dove to the ground, narrowly avoiding a plasma bolt that passed over his head. Rolling to his feet, he activated the explosive device he had been carrying. With a quick glance at the Zorath soldiers, he threw the device toward the generator and dove behind cover. The explosion was deafening. The ground shook beneath him as the shield generator erupted in a burst of light and fire. For a moment, everything went silent. The Zorath soldiers were disoriented, their shields flickering, and the rebels seized the opportunity. Nera's voice crackled in his ear. "Nice work, Marcus. Now finish this." With the shield down, the rebels launched their final assault. They rushed forward, taking down Zorath soldiers one by one. Marcus could see the tide of the battle shifting. The Zorath, stunned by the loss of their shield, were scrambling to regroup. The rebels were pushing them back, gaining ground with every second. But it wasn't over yet. The Zorath were regrouping, and Marcus knew they had only a few minutes before they retaliated with everything they had. The battle was far from won, but for the first time since the fight began, Marcus felt a flicker of hope. They weren't done yet. They were the underdogs, yes, but they were still standing, and they were still fighting. Marcus fired again, his shots hitting their targets with deadly precision. The rebels were pushing forward, taking the fight to the Zoreth with a fury that Marcus had never seen before. The Zoreth were powerful, but they weren't invincible. The rebels had proven that. They had fought with everything they had, and they weren't going down without a fight. The battle raged on, but in that moment, Marcus knew one thing for sure. Humanity's fight for survival had only just begun, and he would fight until the very end, standing side by side with the rebels who had accepted him, trusted him, and made him believe that, against all odds, they could win. The battlefield was silent for a moment, the dust settling after the explosions. It felt like an uneasy pause, as though the universe itself was holding its breath. Marcus stood amidst the wreckage, his weapon still gripped tightly in his hands. His heart pounded, the adrenaline coursing through his veins. The shield generator had been destroyed, and the rebels were pushing forward, gaining ground. But Marcus knew something wasn't right. There was a tension in the air, a quiet sense of unease that he couldn't shake. Nera was beside him, her expression focused but weary. The battle was far from over, but they had a chance now. The Zoreth were retreating. Marcus's heart skipped a beat. He knew that feeling, desperation, fear for the ones you loved. But he couldn't let that cloud his judgment. You don't get to betray your people for your own survival. Not like this. Just as Marcus prepared to take him into custody, a sharp voice interrupted them. "Let him go, Marcus." It was Nera. She had followed him, and now she was standing just a few feet away, her weapon drawn. There was no anger in her voice, just cold determination. Marcus hesitated, his grip on Jarek tightening. He's a traitor. He's working with the Zoreth. Nera's gaze was unwavering. "I know, but we don't have time for this. The Zoreth are on their way. We need to finish what we started." Marcus's heart sank. She was right. The Zoreth were coming, and they needed to stop them before it was too late. But the betrayal stung deeper than any wound he had ever felt. Nera gave him a single nod, and then she turned to Jarek. "You're coming with us. If you fight us, we'll leave you to the Zoreth." Jarek, broken and defeated, nodded silently. He had no choice. As they moved back toward the rebel lines, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. The Zoreth were regrouping, and now they had a traitor in their midst. The fight was about to become even more dangerous, and Marcus wasn't sure how much longer they could hold on. But he knew one thing for sure. They couldn't afford to lose any more of their own. The tension in the air was palpable as they prepared for the final assault. The stakes had never been higher, and the cost of failure was more than any of them could bear. The next fight would be their hardest yet, and Marcus wasn't sure if they would all survive it. But he would fight until the end, no matter the cost. The air was thick with tension, the quiet before the storm. Marcus's eyes scanned the horizon, where dark shapes of Zoreth warships were slowly descending, casting their shadows over the battlefield. The rebel forces were gathered, their ranks thinned but still determined. Nara stood beside him, her expression hard, her eyes locked on the enemy. This was it, the final push. Everything had led to this moment. The betrayal, the sacrifices, the loss of their brothers and sisters in arms. It had all led them here, to the edge of total annihilation or victory. Marcus clenched his fist around his rifle, the weight of the weapon comforting in his hand. It wasn't just a tool, it was a reminder of the lives lost and the fight they still had ahead of them. "This is it," Nera said, her voice steady despite the chaos unfolding around them. "If we don't stop them now, it's over." Marcus nodded grimly. The Zoreth were no longer just an enemy. They were a force of nature, cold and ruthless, determined to crush everything in their path. And they had the numbers to do it. But the humans had something the Zoreth didn't, something they couldn't understand. Willpower, determination, the refusal to back down, no matter the odds. It was what made them human, and it was what had kept them alive this long. A sudden roar broke the silence as the first wave of Zoreth infantry stormed toward them, their dark, armored figures moving in perfect sync. The Zoreth had no fear, no hesitation. They were machines, programmed to destroy, and they were relentless. Marcus's pulse quickened. This was going to be brutal. "Hold the line," Nora shouted, rallying the troops around them. "We fight for humanity's survival. No retreat." The rebels surged forward, their guns blazing, creating a wall of fire that momentarily halted the Zoreth advance. But it wasn't enough. The enemy was vast, their weapons far superior. Marcus could see it clearly now. The Zoreth were moving like a tide, overwhelming them with sheer force. He had seen battles like this before, and he knew how they ended. It was a matter of who had the courage to make the impossible choice. Nera was by his side, cutting down Zoreth soldiers with brutal efficiency, her eyes scanning the battlefield for weak points. But even she could see the problem. The rebels were outnumbered, and their ammunition was dwindling. The Zoreth forces were relentless, pushing forward, slowly but surely. Marcus fought with everything he had, the adrenaline keeping him alive as he charged forward, his rifle blazing. But no matter how many Zoreth he took down, more appeared to take their place. He felt the weight of every lost life, every soldier who had fought beside him. Now just another name on a growing list of the fallen. The battlefield was a swirling chaos of gunfire, explosions, and the screams of the dying. It was like a nightmare, one that refused to end. And then, just as Marcus thought they might be overrun, something unexpected happened. From the distance, a sudden burst of light pierced the sky, blinding everyone for a split second. It was a signal they had been waiting for. Marcus's heart skipped a beat. "Everyone, fall back to the rendezvous point," Nora shouted, her voice cutting through the din of battle. "We need to regroup." The rebels didn't need to be told twice. They turned and ran, a chaotic retreat, but they moved with purpose. They had trained for this. The Zoreth were closing in, but the humans weren't running blindly. They were moving toward a trap, a final, desperate stand. Marcus took one last look at the battlefield, his gaze lingering on the bodies of fallen comrades. They had fought hard, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. He had to make sure the Zoreth didn't win. "Move, Marcus," Nara called, already sprinting toward the new position. He snapped out of his daze and followed her, the sound of footsteps and distant explosions filling the air as they sprinted toward the rendezvous point. It wasn't far, but every step felt like an eternity. The Zoreth weren't far behind, but they were in the open now, vulnerable. The final assault was their only hope. As they neared the rendezvous point, Marcus could hear the roar of engines. More rebel ships were arriving, the fighters swooping down from the sky. The Zoreth had no idea what was coming. They had been focused on the ground forces, but now they had a new threat to face. "Now," Nara shouted, signaling the ships to attack. In an instant, the sky erupted with fire as the rebel ships unleashed a barrage of missiles and laser fire on the Zoreth forces. The sky was filled with explosions, a fiery rain that rocked the Zoreth troops. The ground shook as bombs dropped, clearing the path for the rebels to regroup. Marcus could see it now. The Zoreth were retreating. The rebel forces had managed to turn the tide. The Zoreth, who had been so sure of their victory, were now scrambling to save themselves. It was a moment of hope, a glimmer of possibility. The humans weren't done yet. They still had a chance. But as the Zoreth forces began to retreat, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Not yet. The Zoreth were resilient, and if they regrouped, they could be just as dangerous. The battle might be won, but the war wasn't over. The rebels regrouped, breathing heavily, but they stood victorious. The Zoreth had been dealt a blow they weren't expecting, but Marcus knew it wasn't the end. Not yet. They had won a battle, but the final assault would come again. As Marcus looked around at the faces of the rebels, he saw something in their eyes. Determination. They weren't giving up. Not while there was still a chance to win. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Marcus allowed himself to hope. The final assault wasn't just about victory, it was about survival. And humanity wasn't done yet. The final battle was over. The Zorath forces, once so powerful and determined, had been driven back. The rebel fighters stood amidst the wreckage, their bodies weary, their hearts heavy with the weight of the cost. Marcus's eyes scanned the battlefield, taking in the wreckage of the once mighty Zorath warships and the fallen soldiers, both human and alien alike. He had made it. The humans had made it. But at what cost? Around him, the survivors were beginning to regroup. There were no celebrations, no victory cheers. The quiet aftermath of battle was filled with the sound of distant alarms and the occasional cry of pain from the wounded. But there was also something else, a sense of relief, of something that felt like hope. For the first time in a long while, Marcus felt that he could breathe again. It wasn't over yet. There was still much work to be done. But humanity had fought and had come out on top. As Marcus made his way through the wreckage, his heart heavy with the losses, he saw Nera standing by a destroyed Zorath warship, her eyes scanning the horizon. She looked strong, but Marcus knew her better than anyone. He could see the sadness in her posture, the grief of losing comrades who had fought beside them. "Did we win, Nera?" Marcus asked, his voice soft, tired. Nera turned to him, her eyes locking with his. Her expression softened. "We did, but the cost was high." Marcus nodded, understanding. They had lost too many good soldiers, Bonner, Soren, and the others. Those who had fought with everything they had, who had believed in this cause until the very end. The memory of their sacrifices weighed heavily on Marcus's chest. But amid the grief and loss, there was also a quiet pride. Humanity had faced an enemy stronger and more advanced than anything they could have imagined. Yet they had fought back, using every ounce of their courage and resourcefulness. The Zorath had underestimated the human spirit, and now they had seen what it could do. As the rebels gathered around, the leaders began to organize their next steps. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. There were still remnants of the Zorath forces scattered across the galaxy, and they would need to be hunted down and defeated. The war was not finished, but they had shown the universe that humanity was a force to be reckoned with. Marcus walked over to the memorial they had set up for the fallen soldiers. It was a simple arrangement, just a few flickering lights and a place to honor those who had given everything. He stood there for a moment, his thoughts drifting to Bonner and the others. They had all believed in something bigger than themselves. They had believed that humanity could survive, no matter the odds. And they had given their lives to protect that belief. The sound of footsteps interrupted his thoughts. Nara walked up beside him, her presence comforting in the silence. "They'll be remembered," she said quietly, "for their courage, for their sacrifice." Marcus nodded. "I know, but it doesn't make it easier. We lost so many." "I know," she replied. "But we're still here. We're still fighting." Marcus glanced at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah, we are." For a moment, the two of them stood there, watching the sun begin to set over the battlefield, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink. The stars were just starting to appear, distant and cold, a reminder of the vastness of the universe. But in that moment, it didn't seem so cold. For the first time in what felt like forever, Marcus felt a sense of peace. The fight wasn't over. There was still much to do, but they had made it. They had survived. As the days passed, the rebel forces began to rebuild. New alliances were forged, new leaders rose to take charge, and slowly, but surely, the survivors began to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. But there was no going back to what it had been before. The war had changed them all. They had learned the true meaning of sacrifice, of survival. They had learned that no matter how strong the enemy, humanity would always find a way to fight back. Marcus continued to lead the charge, but now, he did so with the memory of his fallen comrades always in his heart. He had become a symbol of hope for the humans who remained, a beacon of strength and resilience. But he knew the truth, that his true legacy was not just in the battles he fought or the victories he had won. It was in the courage of every soldier who had stood beside him, the willingness to risk everything for the survival of humanity. And then one day, as the rebellion continued to grow stronger, a new message came through. A message from a distant galaxy, from a people who had heard of the humans' victory over the Zoreth. They were offering their help, their resources, and their technology. It was a sign. The rebellion was no longer just a group of scattered humans fighting for survival. It was becoming something greater, something more powerful. The galaxy had taken notice. Humanity had made its mark. Marcus stood on the balcony of their new base, staring out at the stars. It was a new beginning. The road ahead would be difficult, but they had proven to themselves and to the universe that they were not to be underestimated. They would continue to fight, continue to push forward. And one day, the galaxy would know them for what they were, a force that could not be defeated. The legacy of those who had fallen would live on, in every human who took up arms to protect their world, in every life saved by their bravery. It would live on in the heart of every rebel, every fighter, every person who refused to give up. It would live on in Marcus, who had led them through the darkest of times, and who would carry their memory into the future, a hero's legacy, written in the stars.